The drone of the airplane engine was a physical weight pressing against my temples, a relentless vibration that seemed to rattle the very bones of my exhaustion. I shifted in the cramped economy seat, the stiff fabric of my denim jacket bunching uncomfortably around my arms, while the thin gray t-shirt underneath clung to my skin with the clammy residue of airport anxiety. 27 years of life, and it felt like every single mistake, every unpaid bill, and every hour of overtime had coalesced into this singular moment of unbearable fatigue. I wasn't traveling for leisure. I was running, or at least trying to, moving from a city that had chewed me up to a potential job interview in a place that promised nothing but more heat and more struggle. The air in the cabin was recycled and stale, smelling faintly of pretzels and despair. I tried to keep my eyes open, to focus on the scratched plastic of the tray table in front of me, but the heaviness was a tide I couldn't swim against. Beside me, the passenger in the window seat was a statue of stillness. I hadn't looked at him closely when I boarded, just a blur of dark clothing and a posture that took up space without seeming aggressive. He was reading, or maybe just staring out into the black abyss of the night sky, but he felt solid. Unlike the flimsy world I was living in, where eviction notices fluttered like autumn leaves, he felt like an anchor. My head bobbed, gravity playing a cruel joke on my neck muscles. I fought it once, twice, jerking awake with a gasp that no one heard over the roar of the turbines. But the third time I lost the war. My body surrendered, sliding sideways, seeking purchase, seeking anything that wasn't the hard edge of the seat. My cheek found a surface that was firm yet yielding, warm and smelling of something impossibly expensive. Sandalwood, cold rain, and steel. It was the safest place I had rested in years. I should have pulled away. I should have apologized and corrected my posture. But the darkness swallowed me whole, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't dream of drowning. I drifted in a void of absolute, terrifying peace, tethered to the world only by the rhythmic rise and fall of a stranger's breath beneath my ear. Consciousness returned not with the jarring thud of landing gear or the shrill beep of an alarm clock, but with the slow, luxurious slide of silk against bare skin. The sensation was so alien, so utterly removed from the scratchy cotton sheets of my studio apartment, that my mind refused to accept it as reality. I kept my eyes closed, breathing in deeply, expecting the smell of stale airplane air. Instead, the air was crisp, chilled to perfection, and carried the faint scent of jasmine and antiseptic cleanliness. I stretched, my limbs feeling heavy but rested, a languidness I hadn't known I was capable of possessing. Then, the memory hit me, the flight, the shoulder, the stranger. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't on a plane. I was staring up at a ceiling that seemed miles away, adorned with intricate crown molding and a chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of diamonds. I shot up, the silk sheet pooling around my waist. I was in a bed the size of a small island, in a room that whispered of wealth so vast it felt predatory. Floor-to-ceiling windows covered one entire wall, blocked by heavy velvet blackout curtains that let only a sliver of blinding desert light bleed through. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I looked down at myself. My denim jacket was gone. My gray shirt was gone. I was wearing a silk robe that felt like water, shimmering in a pale champagne color that I would never dare to touch in a store for fear of staining it. I scrambled backward, hitting the padded headboard, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice rusty. No answer. I looked at my hands, trembling as I clutched the sheets, and that's when the light caught it. A weight on my left ring finger. I froze. Slowly, terrifyingly, I lifted my hand. There, sitting heavy and possessive on my finger, was a diamond the size of a robin's egg, flanked by emeralds, set in a band of platinum that felt cold against my skin. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a shackle disguised as a star. Beneath it sat a simple, thick wedding band. The room spun. I scrambled out of the bed, my feet sinking into plush carpet, and ran to the sliver of light at the window. I tore the curtains back. The view assaulted me, the unmistakable, garish, glorious skyline of Las Vegas, but seen from a vantage point of dizzying height and seclusion. I wasn't just in Vegas. I was in a fortress above it. I needed to find a door. I needed to find my clothes. I needed to wake up from what had to be a hallucination induced by stress and altitude. I navigated the room, which was larger than my entire apartment complex, touching the furniture as if to test its solidity. Mahogany, marble, gold leaf. It was all real. I found a set of double doors and pushed them open, stepping out into a hallway that stretched endlessly, lined with artwork that probably cost more than my life's earnings. "Is anyone here?" I called out, my voice gaining a little more strength, fueled by the rising tide of adrenaline. Silence answered me, heavy and watchful. I walked barefoot down the corridor, the silence amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I turned a corner and found myself on a mezzanine overlooking a sprawling living area. And there he was, the man from the plane. He was sitting on a leather sofa, his back to me, but I recognized the set of his shoulders, the same shoulders I had drooled on. But the context had shifted violently. On the plane, he had been a quiet traveler in a dark coat. Here, he was the center of gravity. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and dark trousers. A glass of amber liquid sat on the table before him. He didn't turn around, but his voice drifted up to me, baritone and smooth, wrapping around me like smoke. "You slept for 14 hours, Imani." I was beginning to worry he knew my name. The sound of it in his mouth felt like a violation and a caress all at once. I gripped the railing, my knuckles turning white. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to project a toughness I didn't feel. "Where are my clothes? Why am I wearing this ring?" He stood up then, slowly, with the grace of a jungle cat that has no reason to rush. He turned to face me. His face was angular, devastatingly handsome, with eyes so dark they looked like inkwells. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a mar on perfection that only made him more terrifying. "I am Daehyun," he said simply, as if that explained the universe. "And you are wearing that ring because yesterday, while you were sleeping, we landed. And last night, in a private ceremony, you became my wife." "That's impossible," I spat, descending the stairs with reckless speed. I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree to anything. I was asleep. I reached the bottom of the stairs and marched toward him, stopping only when the sheer force of his presence hit me like a physical wall. He was taller than he had seemed sitting down, towering over me. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes tracking my every movement with an unsettling intensity. "You were asleep for the flight," Daehyun corrected, his tone maddeningly calm. "You were quite awake for the signing. Although you were heavily influenced by the exhaustion and perhaps the champagne." He set the glass down. "But the legality isn't your concern, Imani. The reality is," he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, tossing it onto the coffee table between us. It wasn't the marriage license. It was a bank statement. My bank statement. And next to it, the eviction notice I had stuffed into my jacket pocket. Imani, 27. No living family. $34,000 in student debt. $6,000 in credit card debt. 3 months behind on rent. He recited the numbers with a detached precision that made me feel naked. "I have cleared it," the words hung in the air. "All of it," I whispered, the fight draining out of me for a split second before the horror rushed back in. "I didn't ask you to do that." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his scent, that sandalwood and rain, flooding my senses again. "No, you didn't." "But my wife cannot be in debt to anyone but me." He reached out, his fingers grazing my chin, tilting my face up. His touch was electric, sparking a shiver that I hated myself for feeling. "You are safe here. You are provided for. The world outside," he gestured vaguely to the windows, "was eating you alive. I have simply removed you from the menu." "I am not a rescue dog," I snapped, jerking my face away from his hand. "And I am not for sale. I'm leaving." I turned on my heel, scanning the room for an exit. I saw the massive front doors, intricate wood carved with dragons, and made a break for them. My bare feet slapped against the cold marble. I expected him to chase me, to grab me, but he didn't move. I could feel his eyes on my back, watching, waiting. I reached the doors and grabbed the heavy brass handles, pulling with all my weight. They didn't budge.
Locked.
I fumbled with the deadbolt, twisting it, and threw the door open. The heat of the Nevada desert hit me like a blast furnace. But it wasn't freedom. Standing at the bottom of the porch steps were two men in dark suits, their hands clasped in front of them, wearing earpieces. They looked at me with zero surprise. Beyond them, a wrought iron gate taller than the house itself surrounded the perimeter. "Let me pass," I ordered the guards, clutching the silk robe tighter around me. They didn't even blink. "Mrs. Kim." One of them nodded respectfully, but didn't move an inch. Mrs. Kim. The name felt like a slap. I turned back to the house. Dae-hyun was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, the sunlight casting long shadows across his face. "There are no keys, Imani," he said softly. "The gates only open when I say they open." I looked from him to the guards, then out at the shimmering heat haze of the desert. I was in the middle of nowhere. "You can't keep me here," I yelled, my voice cracking. "This is kidnapping." He pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly toward me, stepping out into the heat. He didn't seem to feel the temperature. "Kidnapping is such a crude word," he mused, stopping just inches from me. He looked down, his gaze dropping to the ring on my finger. "We are newlyweds. We are in our honeymoon phase. The world believes you are here because you want to be." And in time, he reached out, taking my hand, his grip firm and unyielding, threading his fingers through mine so the diamond caught the sun, blinding me. "In time, you will realize that there is nowhere else you could possibly belong.
I have bought your debts, Imani.
I have bought your freedom. And now, I intend to collect on my investment." The look in his eyes wasn't just possessiveness, it was a terrifying, abyssal hunger. He wasn't just a rich man. The way he stood, the way the guards feared him, he was a king of a very dark kingdom, and I had just been crowned his reluctant queen. The sun began to bleed out over the horizon, painting the desert in bruised shades of purple and violent orange, a visual echo of the turmoil churning in my gut. I had spent the hours since our confrontation pacing the perimeter of the library, a room lined with books that looked like they had never been opened, their leather spines stiff and judgmental. I was still wearing the silk robe, having refused the selection of evening gowns the silent, terrified house staff had wheeled in on a garment rack. It was a petty rebellion, clinging to the nightwear as if it were armor, but it was the only choice I had left. When the double doors opened, Dae-hyun didn't ask if I was ready. He simply filled the doorway, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He had changed into a tuxedo, the black fabric absorbing the dim light, tailored so sharply it looked like a weapon. "Dinner," he announced, a single word that wasn't an invitation but a decree. I wanted to scream, to throw one of the priceless Ming vases at his head, but my stomach betrayed me with a treacherous growl. I hadn't eaten since the pretzels on the plane. "I'm not dressing up for you," I said, crossing my arms over my chest, gripping my elbows until they hurt. Dae-hyun walked into the room, his stride eating up the distance between us. He stopped a foot away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes. "Then don't," he murmured, his gaze dropping to where the robe cinched at my waist. "I prefer you in this. It reminds me of how you looked when I finally had you safe." He offered me his arm. "But you will eat. I did not bring you here to starve you, Imani. I brought you here to worship you." The word worship hung in the air, heavy and blasphemous. I hesitated, then took his arm. His muscles were hard as granite beneath the expensive cloth. As he led me to the dining room, I realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that he wasn't keeping me here because he wanted a prisoner. He was keeping me because he was starving, too, and for some twisted reason, I was the only thing that could feed him. The dining room was a cavern of shadows and candlelight, the table long enough to seat 20, yet set only for 2 at the very end, creating an intimate island in a sea of emptiness. Servants materialized from the gloom, placing dishes of intricate, steaming food before vanishing like ghosts. It was Korean cuisine, but elevated to an art form. Galbi that smelled of smoke and sweetness, kimchi that glistened like rubies, delicate soups that swirled with steam. I picked up my chopsticks, my hands trembling slightly. "Why me?" I asked, the question breaking the silence that had settled over us like a heavy blanket. Out of all the women in the world, out of all the people on that plane, why me? Dae-hyun poured a glass of dark red wine, his movements deliberate and hypnotic. He didn't look at his food, he looked at me. "You think we met on the plane," he said softly, a dark amusement curling the corner of his lip. "You think it was chance." A tired girl, a convenient shoulder. He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving mine. "I have been watching you for 6 months, Imani." The chopstick fell from my hand, clattering against the porcelain bowl. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. 6 months. I whispered, horror rising in my throat. "I was undercover," he continued, his voice calm, terrifyingly reasonable. "My enemies were hunting me. I needed to disappear into the noise of the working class.
I sat in your diner.
I watched you work double shifts on a sprained ankle because you couldn't afford a day off. I watched you share your lunch with a homeless man outside the subway station when you barely had enough calories for yourself." He leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his eyes, turning them into pools of fire. "I saw a queen in rags. I saw a spirit that the world was trying to break, and I decided that the world was unworthy of you.
I didn't steal you, Imani.
I saved you." The admission should have made me run. It should have terrified me to my core, and it did. But beneath the fear, there was a treacherous, vibrating chord of recognition. I had spent my whole life being invisible, being a cog in a machine that ground me down for pennies. No one had ever seen me. And here sat a monster, a man of violence and shadows, who had watched me butter toast and wipe tables and seen something regal. "You're insane," I breathed, pushing my chair back. "You can't just possess people because you admire them." Dae-hyun stood up, the movement fluid and swift. He walked around the table, and I froze, my flight instinct warring with a paralysis born of fascination. He stood behind my chair, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders. His touch was heavy, possessive, branding me through the silk. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, my love," he whispered into my ear, his breath hot against my neck, sending a shiver racing down my spine that had nothing to do with cold. "And looking at you now, angry, defiant, alive. I know I made the right investment." He trailed a finger down the side of my neck to my pulse point, which was hammering against my skin like a trapped bird. "Eat," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating in my chest. "We're going out tonight. I want to show the city exactly who belongs to me." The duality of his tone, the threat and the tenderness, was dizzying. I picked up the chopsticks again, my resistance crumbling under the weight of his proximity. As I ate, tasting the explosion of flavors, I realized I was sitting in a cage of gold, but for the first time in my life, the door was locked from the outside, and I wasn't the one holding the key. And, God help me, part of me didn't want to find it. The drive into the city was a blur of neon lights and speed. We were in the back of a black Maybach that felt more like a tank than a car, the leather seats smelling of new money and old secrets. Dae-hyun sat beside me, his hand resting on my thigh, not squeezing, just there, a constant reminder of his claim. I looked out the tinted window at the Las Vegas Strip, a river of artificial light cutting through the desert darkness. It was a world I knew only from movies, a playground for people who didn't have to choose between electricity and groceries. Now I was gliding through it like royalty. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "To a place where luck is manufactured," Dae-hyun replied enigmatically. The car slowed, pulling up to the curb of a casino that looked like a palace made of glass. The doors opened, and the noise of the street rushed in. Laughter, engines, the chaotic symphony of vice. Dae-hyun stepped out and offered his hand. When I took it, he pulled me flush against him, his arm wrapping around my waist like a steel band. We moved through the crowd, and I saw the way people parted for him. It wasn't just respect, it was fear. Men in expensive suits nodded nervously. Women looked at him with hungry eyes, then looked at me with venom. I felt small, exposed in my silk robe which I had refused to change, but Dae-hyun walked with his head high, wearing my defiance like a badge of honor. We reached a private elevator, and as the doors slid shut, sealing us in silence, he turned to me. "You are trembling," he noted, his thumb tracing the curve of my hip. "I'm scared," I admitted, looking up at him. "Everyone is looking at you like you're the devil," he smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that made my knees weak. "I am the devil to them, Imani. But to you," he leaned down, his lips brushing mine, a feather-light promise of devastation. "To you, I am simply the man who burns the world, so you can be warm." The elevator dinged, opening onto a rooftop terrace that overlooked the entire city. It was breathtaking, the wind whipping my hair across my face. But the peace was shattered in a heartbeat. A crack, sharp and loud like a whip, echoed through the air. The glass railing beside us shattered. Before my brain could register the sound of the gunshot, Dae-hyun was moving. He didn't run away, he moved into the line of fire. He spun me around, shielding my body with his own, pressing my face into his chest. "Down," he roared, his voice changing from the smooth baritone of a lover to the guttural command of a general. He tackled me to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I lay on the cold concrete, the scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of ozone and fear. Another shot rang out, chipping the stone inches from his head. He didn't flinch. He was a solid wall of muscle over me, his hand cupping the back of my head, protecting me from the debris. I looked up and saw his face. He wasn't afraid. He was furious. His eyes were scanning the rooftops opposite us, calculating, predatory. He pulled a gun from a holster beneath his jacket, a sleek, black metal death machine, and fired 3 shots into the darkness, without even breaking his rhythm. "Stay down," he growled at me, his eyes locking onto mine for a split second. In that chaos, amidst the gunfire and the screaming that rose from the street below, I saw something that shattered my last defense. He wasn't protecting his property. He was protecting his heart. He was willing to take a bullet for me, a woman he had kidnapped, a woman who had given him nothing but scorn. "Dae-hyun," I screamed as I saw a bloom of red appear on the white shoulder of his shirt. He winced, but didn't move off me. "I have you," he gritted out, firing again. "I have you. Nothing touches you." And as the security team swarmed the roof, shouting orders and returning fire, I clung to his lapels, burying my face in his bleeding shoulder, realizing with a jolt of horror and ecstasy that I was safe. In the middle of a war zone, beneath the body of a Mafia boss, I was safer than I had ever been in my quiet, desperate life. The ride back to the mansion was a suffocating silence of adrenaline and pain. The car tore through the desert roads, the speedometer buried, the convoy of security vehicles flanking us like a Praetorian guard. Dae-hyun sat with his head leaned back against the seat, his eyes closed, his hand still gripping mine so hard my fingers were numb. The red stain on his shoulder had spread, ruining the pristine white shirt, a stark contrast to the dark interior.
We didn't speak.
There were no words for the shift that had occurred on that rooftop. When we arrived, the staff was already waiting with medical kits, their faces pale masks of efficiency. They tried to usher him into the infirmary, but he shoved them aside with his good arm. "Room," he barked. "My room." He dragged me with him, not forcefully, but as if he couldn't bear the physical separation. We entered the master bedroom, the same room I had woken up in, and he collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the gun clattering onto the floor. I stood there, trembling, my hands covered in his blood. "Imani," he rasped, opening his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but burning with that same intense focus. "Come here." I shouldn't have moved. I should have let the doctors handle him. But my feet moved on their own. I walked to him, stepping between his spread knees. I reached out and began to undo his shirt buttons, my fingers slick with blood. He watched me, his chest heaving. "You're hurt," I whispered, pushing the shirt off his shoulders. The bullet had grazed the top of his deltoid, a deep gouge, ugly and weeping, but not lethal. It is nothing, he dismissed, wincing as I touched the skin around the wound. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why did you cover me? You could have died. He reached up with his uninjured hand, cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I told you, he said, his voice rough with pain and something else, something raw and terrifyingly open. Perception is truth. You perceive yourself as a captive. I perceive you as my life. If the bullet hits you, it kills me anyway. It is merely a matter of efficiency to take it myself. The logic was twisted, insane, and overwhelmingly romantic in a way that defied all reason. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked at the wound, then up at his face. The sharp jaw, the dark eyes, the scar that suddenly seemed less like a mar and more like a testament to survival. I wasn't looking at a monster anymore. I was looking at a man who had built a fortress around himself and then torn down the gate for me. You need to be cleaned, I said, my voice steadying. I walked to the bathroom, grabbed a warm towel and antiseptic, and returned. He sat still as I cleaned the wound, his muscles jumping under my touch, his breath hitching not from pain, but from the intimacy of it. When I finished, I didn't pull away. I stood there, my hands resting on his bare chest, feeling the heavy, rhythmic thud of his heart. It beat for me. Imani, he groaned, his control snapping. He pulled me down.
I didn't resist.
I landed in his lap, my arms going around his neck, careful of the wound. You are reckless, I murmured against his lips. I am devoted, he corrected. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of souls, a desperate, starving claim that tasted of iron and expensive scotch and surrender. I kissed him back, pouring all my confusion, my fear, and my sudden, blinding realization of desire into it. I wasn't just falling asleep on his shoulder anymore. I was waking up to him. The morning light that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains was different this time. It wasn't an intrusion. It was a caress. I lay tangled in the silk sheets, my head resting on Daehyun's uninjured shoulder, his arm draped protectively over my waist, anchoring me to the bed and to him. The events of the last 24 hours played in my mind like a fever dream. The flight, the wedding, the shooting, the blood, the kiss. But the warmth of his skin against mine was undeniably real. He shifted, his breath stirring my hair, and I knew he was awake. Regrets? His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through his chest into my cheek. I traced the line of a tattoo on his pectoral muscle, a sprawling dragon in black ink. I should have many, I admitted quietly. I should be running for the door right now. I felt his muscles tense, his grip tightening instinctively. But, he prompted, the single word laced with tension. But I'm tired of running, I sighed, lifting my head to look at him. His hair was messy, his eyes unguarded for the first time. I'm tired of fighting the world alone, Daehyun. You're a dangerous man. You're controlling. You're obsessive. I paused, letting a small smile touch my lips. But yesterday, when those bullets were flying, it was the first time in my life I knew, with absolute certainty, that someone would catch me if I fell. Daehyun pushed himself up, ignoring the stiffness in his shoulder, and loomed over me. The power dynamic had shifted, though. He wasn't looking at me like a possession. He was looking at me like a miracle he was afraid would vanish. I will always catch you, he vowed, the intensity in his eyes searing. I told you, Imani.
I have an empire.
I have money that can burn a hole in the sky. But it was all just
noise.
Until I saw you. You are the silence in the chaos. You are the anchor. He reached for my hand, lifting it to kiss the ring that still sat heavy on my finger. Stay with me. Not as a captive. Not as a debt to be paid. But as my wife. As my equal. Rule this chaos with me. I looked at the ring, the diamonds refracting the morning light into 1,000 rainbows. I thought about the diner, the unpaid bills, the cold loneliness of my apartment. Then I looked at the man who had taken a bullet for me without blinking. The choice wasn't between freedom and captivity. It was between a life of struggle and a life of fierce, terrifying, all-consuming love. Okay, I whispered. Okay. The word was small, but it shattered the last of the walls between us. Dae-hyun didn't smile. He looked as if he had just conquered a nation. He lowered his forehead to mine. Then let them come, he whispered fiercely. Let the whole world come. We will burn it all down together. 3 months later. The private jet hummed with a smooth, expensive vibration, a stark contrast to the rattling commercial flight that had started it all. I sat by the window, watching the clouds form a white floor beneath us. I wasn't wearing denim anymore. I was wearing a tailored cream suit that cost more than my old car, my hair swept back, the diamond on my finger catching the sunlight. Across from me, Dae-hyun was on a call, speaking rapid-fire Korean, his voice sharp and commanding. He was the boss, the terrifying, ruthless leader of a syndicate that spanned continents. But as he spoke, his eyes drifted to me. He paused mid-sentence and just looked. The hardness in his face melted away, replaced by that private, possessive warmth that was reserved only for me. He hung up the phone and reached across the aisle, taking my hand. He didn't say anything, he didn't have to. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full. I squeezed his hand back, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. I looked out at the horizon, a limitless expanse of blue. I had fallen asleep a poor girl, exhausted and alone. I had woken up in a nightmare that had slowly, terrifyingly, beautifully turned into a dream. I wasn't just Imani anymore. I was Mrs. Kim. I was the queen of the desert, the wife of the devil, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed the journey of Imani and Dae-hyun, and if you love dark romance with a happily ever after, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a part of the saga. What did you think of Dae-hyun's protective streak? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep dreaming.